So this next presentation takes a hands-on approach to building strong relationships, easing communication, and of course, providing highly effective feedback to your external art teams. By the end of the presentation, you should ensure that every point of your feedback is followed while mitigating risks, reducing revision, and saving time and budget. With that, I'd like to introduce our next presenters, Mr. David Clément. He's an art director at Ubisoft Shanghai node, and Mr. Quentin Cucuel, outsourcing manager of Ubisoft Chengdu. And I'm sorry, I just slaughtered your last name. I apologize.
Cucuel? Thank you very much. Yeah, you murdered it.
Thanks, guys.
But,
Very cool. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I just don't get it. Why won't they implement my feedback? They don't seem to learn at all. Like, how many of you have already pronounced the exact words before? Yeah. Yeah, some here. The others are liars. Hi, I'm Quentin. I'm the outsourcing manager of Ubisoft Chengdu.
And I'm Dave. I'm the art outsourcing art director at Ubisoft Shanghai.
Yeah. At last year's XDS, Ubisoft presented its outsourcing structure. And for those who missed it, here is a recap of the main takeaways of last year. So Ubisoft currently has 30 production studios in 19 countries in the world. Over 10,000 people working on 6 continents on more than 40 projects at the same time. 2 dedicated outsourcing units located in Shanghai and Chengdu help coordinate the outsourcing mandate of all the production studios, along with a trusted pool of external partners. So building this trust is at the core of Ubisoft philosophy. We've been spending a tremendous amount of time and energy trying to bridge the gap between the internal and external staff and developing this trust with the external partners. So over the many subjects we tackled over the years, today we chose to focus our discussion on a vital phase, a crucial phase of the collaboration that covers 3 of the main aspects of a good collaboration. These are communication, productivity, and reactivity. Today, we're going to talk about how to address good feedback to your outsourcing partners. So when I arrived in Ubisoft and started working on outsourcing 3 years ago, I had a pretty simplistic vision of the relationship between the internal and external staff. The client would basically give the outsourcing mandate to the vendor, and if the result didn't meet the requirement, well, the client would just stop working with this company. But we're not selling chairs here. The creative process, when it comes to collaborating on a video game, is actually first and foremost a matter of communication. So when the vendors don't actually implement the feedback as you intend them to, when they actually, yes, it happened, mistake a flying dragon for a dragonfly, when they actually forget some of the feedback you're clearly outlined in your email, well, the responsibility may not lie entirely on their end. In fact, taking a look at our very own feedback, we realized a few things.
For one, we found that when we were reviewing some of our feedback, what we thought was super clear turned out to be really quite confusing.
Yeah, we also had difficulties finding the right balance between vague and over-guiding feedback. Sometimes trying to explain something too hard may be very confusing for the vendors.
And there's that thing, when you're in the middle of writing your feedback, and then somebody interrupts you with something else you need to take a look at, and you come back and you're like, what was I talking about here? I can't remember.
And last but not least, we were spending so much time writing our reviews. We actually didn't have enough time to put everything we wanted to say in the feedback in one day, which of course resulted in delays in the vendors. So yes, maybe our feedback was the issue.
So why do we want to give good feedback? What's in it for us? Well, for the reviewing team, for the members of the review team, we want our jobs to be easy. We want to be able to spend more and more time of our day making art or making decisions, and less of our time giving feedback. And we want it to just be a good life. For the project, we want to build some efficiencies. We want the project to go smoother and smoother as it goes, and to be spending less and less time doing revisions. And for the studio, we want to build relationships with our vendors that we can take from project to project to project, and have each project go smoother and easier than the one before. So, of course, when you're working with any kind of relationship, there's always a beginning. And the beginning for us at Ubisoft is the quality test. Now, with a quality test, what we want to do is we want to figure out if this is a vendor that we might want to work with, if these are people that are going to be jiving well with what we do. Now, the first part of that, of course, is their art quality good? But really, this is the easy part. You know, if any vendor can find one artist who can do a good job making an asset. In fact, some vendors have been known to outsource their quality tests to another vendor or maybe even a freelancer. So this part, it doesn't really particularly the important part of the test. The important part for us is the communication. So were they easy to communicate with? Were they able to ask good questions? And did they apply the feedback as we intended? So really, it's a matter of we want to give the feedback, maybe a little less feedback than normal, but we want to give the same style of feedback that we plan to give in the actual production. And that way we can get a little bit of a vibe from them to whether or not they're on track with us. If they're able to give us some good results from the feedback that we give them, then they might be a good partner for us. So feedback does two main duties. One is getting this asset just right. But the bigger one is setting up the next asset for success. So here's one of our sort of worst case scenarios where we have the pilot batch, we have quite a bit of work that we're doing for every part of the pilot batch, and by the time we're getting to batch 3, it's the same. We're giving lots of feedback, lots of direction for every single asset all the way through all the batches. What we want to do is we want to try to be more instructive and more guiding for our vendors so that we can turn it to be something more like this. For the beginning, we're doing in-depth feedback. We're doing style guidance, technical directions, paint-overs, art direction. And by the time we get to the second or third batch, really we're just giving a couple opinions about, you know, maybe this would look a little bit better red. And all the really core stuff, they're just getting it now.
I'm sorry. Just don't mean to interrupt, but it looks like we've got a submission from one of our partners. Do you think you have time for a quick review, maybe?
You know, always have time for a quick review.
Let's do it.
Just happen to have Photoshop queued up here, so let's switch over to that. We got a nice pair of pants here that one of our vendors delivered. It looks okay, but I can see a few problems with it, a few things that I'd like to call out. So the first thing I want to do when I'm doing this kind of feedback is I want to look at the asset as a whole. I want to study it, understand it. Are the pieces, of course, any asset, I'm always going to be able to find one or two things that I don't like about it, but are they important enough? Should I even bother mentioning them? Or should I just say, yeah, approved, and I'm sure it will look fine once we put some textures on there? Right, so on this particular case, yeah, I want to give some feedback, so I've decided that's what I'm going to do. So I start assembling all of my screenshots. I take a few screenshots from a few different angles, just the amount I need. Just what we need is just a just right amount. So in this case, I wanted to see it from a couple views so I could see all the things I'm going to communicate about. And right in the same image, I'm going to paste in any resources, like maybe, in this case, the original concept that we sent them, but it might be some additional pictures or maybe some additional chicken scratch from me. Get that all together in one image because I want to keep it really clear and really easy for the vendor. They can give this image over to the artist, and it's not a little bit in this one and a little bit in another picture that maybe he loses, and then some of the feedback gets lost. The next thing I do is I want to get my thoughts in order, or I want to figure out everything there is about this asset that I want to give feedback about. So for me, it's about, if you're going to give feedback, I want to give all of the feedback. I want to jump in with both feet. I want to say everything that there is about this asset that has got a problem, and I want to say them now. Because I don't want to say a little bit about the knees today, and then they submit that, and then I say, oh, the belt could use a little bit of work, and then they submit that, and you just end up going back and forth, and it's terrible. So what I want to do is I draw little orange arrows all over my drawing, all over the screenshot, pointing at every single little thing that I want to make some feedback about. And I leave it there. Now, drawing the arrows, what this does for me is, well, maybe I just get that far, or maybe I start doing my overpaint, and somebody calls on me for giving a quick art review to one of the on-site artists, or maybe I get called out for lunch or something. And I come back, and I'm like, where was I? And I can look at this, and I can see my arrows, and I can see what they're pointing at, and go, oh, yeah, I didn't like the seams there, and I didn't like this. Okay, I remember what I was doing. So it's a really good tool for making sure that I remember all my feedback later, as well as helping me to just clarify my thoughts at the beginning. Next, I would go ahead and do some overpainting. And so in this case, I want to move some of the seam lines. They're not quite in the right place, looking at what the concept looks like. So I draw right over top of them some green lines where I want them to be.
Sorry, I seem to interrupt a lot. Here you apply a basic paint over, just green lines, but can this be applied to all the 3D models?
Not really, no. This is one of the more simple ways of doing feedback, but there's a lot of different ways that we can do overpaints. In fact, I just happen to have a slide queued up for that.
Great.
So the green lines, and I specifically choose the word green, this is really good for silhouette changes, for when I want to move something in that screenshot from here to there. You know, maybe it's the shape of a nose, or it's moving a seam line on the pants, or something like this. The green line's really good for this. It's just very simple for the vendor. They can open up front view on their model and move the seam line to the exact same spot, and they know they'll get it approved. It's very simple. And it's very easy for me, too, because I can do it very quickly. But it's not terribly instructive. It's not very good for giving them knowledge about what to do in the future. So what's a little bit better and a little bit more time is what I call the red line bad, green line good. So what this is say in this example with this sword, I'm showing a tracing of what the original sword was, and it's very square. And then I'm drawing a green line showing that it's got some curvature to it. So this is a little bit more instructive. The vendor's able to look at this and go, okay, I get it. This is the kind of things that are going to be failing me on assets in the future. So on my next asset, I'm not going to make everything super square because obviously the art director doesn't like that. Now, moving on from silhouette changes, we get shape changes. As I'm going through all of these, this all gets a little bit more complicated as we go through. And so shape changes, this is really where it's a three-dimensional thing. It's not really like a side view kind of thing. It's something harder to explain exactly what I'm looking for. And so in this case, I'm painting this particular piece. I'm moving some of the parts and painting a little bit different shape and saying, I want it to look like this. Now, it's really nice and clear for the vendor. They're able to look at this and say, I open up ZBrush, and when my sculpt looks exactly the same as his overpaint, then it's good. Perhaps it's not so simple as this one, though. Maybe there's a little bit more that you need to talk about. So we do things like the resculpt. This is particularly a good case if you're art review staff, maybe they're not concept artists, maybe they're model texture guys, and so they're not as familiar with painting over. They might want to just go ahead and re-sculpt the object and take the actual ZBrush or the Maya file and just fix it themselves. It's a good technique, but it takes a little longer, and I also think it's better as an instructive tool to take a screenshot of the sculpt that you just did and send them the screenshot and get them to actually make the change themselves. That way they learn a little bit about how to actually reproduce what you're looking for. Finally, for this stage, we get what I'm calling the reconcept. So in this case, this statue, for me, totally missed the mark. It was weird proportions. The anatomy feels really off. I don't really get a sense that there's a body underneath those clothes that makes any sense. So I wanted to take that right back to the beginning and give another pass at this one and explain better about what they needed to do in order to make this look good. So, of course, like always, I start with showing them a few references, particularly with the face. I wanted a more Greek feel with this. And then I did a sketch about what the underlying anatomy is doing. That it's a slightly Rubenesque lady, and she's got her hips thrown to one side, which was making her spine go into an S-curve and making her left shoulder raise up a little bit. And this is informing a little bit of information about the body that's underneath. And then, of course, now that I know a little bit about the body, I can quickly sketch over top of that, how does the cloth fold in around this, right? So this is a second level of information for the vendor to understand, okay, this cloth has to flow around the body that I've got underneath. And then finally, I had a bit of time on this day anyways, so then I filled in all of the shape information and get a little bit of lighting and to give them a target that they can work towards. And we ended up with a pretty good result in the end.
All right. These paint overs, they all apply to 3D models. Would you have something for textures as well?
Oh, of course. Texturing is a big part of making 3D assets. But of course, texturing is one of those kind of things, it can really take a lot of time doing an overpaint. And so if what I'm trying to do is show color changes or value changes or maybe some slight detailing changes, I like to use the power of the overlay layer in Photoshop. So overlay, I can really play around with all of these things very simply. So a picture like this one, I put about half an hour to an hour's worth of work, and I get to this, and I can really show that the character should have this much more pop. So overlay layers is really great for me. But sometimes, it's more than that. It's the details are wrong. They've painted many things that are wrong, and you have to just do a proper overpaint. This is one character that we were working on, and there was many things I didn't really like about this. So I went ahead and did basically a concept right over top of it and painted exactly what I wanted the model to look like. And so in this case, I can hand this to the vendor, and they have a very clear target of what I'm looking for, and they can pull it off.
All right. So going back to the pants, it was actually a pretty basic level of feedback you wanted to give, so that's why you use the green lines, right?
Exactly. It was simple feedback, so we can use a simple overpaint.
All right.
So back to the pants, as we were saying. Now that I'm doing looking at the pants, I've got my arrows, I've got my overpaint. It's all ready to actually start talking about it, to actually start typing my feedback. I like to keep the feedback off of the image, so one of the first things I'm going to do is I just want to number all of my feedback on here, on the image. So I'm going to go say 1 here, that I want to move these seam lines to the green line. Number 2, I feel that the thickness of the fabric here is and the stitches look a bit too heavy, so it's looking a little bit like leather, and I don't want it to be leather. Number 3, we've got a little piece of plastic here that's supposed to be more like a vent, so I'm going to try to explain how that should look. And number 4, these particular panels should be using a different type of fabric. So what this does for me is, sorry, skipped ahead. What this does for me is it puts them in an order. I'm saying that the seam lines, that's going to be the biggest change. It's going to take a lot of work for them to do it, and it's going to have the biggest impact for me for making this asset look good. So that's my number 1. And number 4, if we don't fix it totally perfectly, it's okay, not so bad. So I'm prioritizing my list here. So when we're writing the feedback, we really have to think about who it is that's actually reading the feedback. And it's not just one person, it's many people. It can be the studio, it can be translators, it can be BD people, or project managers, or the actual artist who's doing the final product. It can be Chinese speakers, English speakers, French speakers, Russian speakers, all different types of people from different walks of life who have different purposes for reading this feedback. From the artist, maybe he just wants to know what he's working on today. He wants to know what he has to accomplish. To the project managers who might want to track repeated issues. Everybody's got a different purpose for it, and we have to make sure that it's pretty readable for anybody who might open it up. So we use Jira, but this same technique could be used for anything else, Handsoft or even emails or whatever. But for us, we use Jira, and what I like to do is I like to paste in the image, and then in line with the text, just underneath usually, I type out all of my feedbacks. I put them in a nice numbered list, and the numbers correspond with the image right above. So why do I give them in numbered feedback like that? For one, it creates a checklist. The artist and the project manager at the vendor, they know that they have 4 pieces of feedback on this asset, and once they're done all 4, it's ready to submit. Also, it's easier to translate. If you can select the text, copy-paste it into Google Translate, or find some word and copy-paste it into a dictionary, maybe the project manager doesn't know some technical word that you've used, or the artist doesn't know English, you can copy-paste that in and get a pretty good start to the translation. So it makes it pretty useful for many people. It's also searchable, within Jira or your email or your forum or whatever you use for your communication. You can do searches. So maybe I've said the feedback about the cloth is a little bit too thick. Maybe I've said that 20 times over the life of the project. And we can now see that that's an issue, and that's something that we have to look at in a more global scale. Like, why are they keep making the pants too thick? And finally, it's a bit of a funny one, but artists suck at spelling and grammar. And Photoshop doesn't have a spell check. And so I've had so many feedbacks come back from the studios where you're reading and you're going, I think they're saying to make it more readable? Readable? Is that readable? And so it's really good to get that out, put it in text, and you can get that nice little red squiggly line that tells you that you made a spelling error, and then you can actually fix that. So we're writing now. What should you write? It's really important to keep the language simple and consistent. So always say the same thing the same way. You don't want to be talking about the brightness of the texture one day, and then you're talking about the value of the texture the next day, or the saturation. Try to be consistent about the way that you're talking about it. And let the image do the talking. You went through all the effort of making an overpaint. You can just say, hey, make it look like this. Just keep it nice and simple. Be neutral in your tone. It can be quite tempting to go, hey, looks great, looks good. But it's better if you're pointing out a particular thing. You're like, I like the way that you made the hem of the pants. Please make all the hem of the pants the same way all the time. But don't be too overly positive, because it can actually, saying, hey, looks good, can be interpreted as, this is the new gold standard. From now on, you don't have to make anything better than that. Everything can be just that level. Right? You want to keep it open for them to excel. And also, don't be too negative either. It's a little hard on the artists. Artists all around the world, we're all sensitive folk. Avoid vague language. Try not to talk about things like make her more beautiful or make him more badass. I mean, what's badass? How is that supposed to look anyways? Like bigger eyebrows maybe, or something? There's terms, a lot of very, very vague terms that we might use that get translated a little bit badly. So it's really good to be nice and technical and specific. Maybe you're making an asset like this, and you want to say, make it more shiny. But in Chinese, the direct translation of shiny isn't really more specularity. It's actually a little bit more like bling or bright. So while you were looking to get this, you might end up getting this, or maybe this. Who knows? So what you really want to do is think like a teacher. Every time that they're handing in an assignment, you want to be getting them to learn, to know more about how you work and what you're looking for, what good looks like to you. Every time you give some feedback is an opportunity to be thinking like a teacher. And the hope is that the next asset comes in, and you don't have to say that same thing again. The next asset, there's even less, and the next asset, even less. And finally, for this part, I like to always make it very clear what the vendor's next step is. Another talk, they talked about pretty much the same thing. I start every round of feedback with this template. Image got off. Approved, fix and proceed, or feedback required. So approved, very simple. I like it, it's good, move on. Fix and proceed, yeah, there's a couple little problems, but you don't need to show it to me again before you move on to the next stage. Or feedback required, I really would like to see it before I let you move on to the next stage. When we're working with vendors, particularly at the beginning, when we've got a lot to go over and don't know our style yet, but even sometimes later when there's hiccups, when there's problems, it can be a really good idea to get the vendor to do a follow-up. So instead of just submitting again the asset, we get them to submit a screenshot for every single piece of feedback that you gave. So zooming in on the actual area that you gave the feedback for. And this has a couple good benefits. One, it becomes a really clear checklist for the vendor. When they start making their screenshots, they might get to like number 7 and go, oh, we didn't actually fix that. Maybe we should go back and fix that, because our screenshot looks exactly the same. It also makes a validation of subtle changes. Like maybe you said reduce this wrinkle, and they reduced it, but not as much as you did as you would like. So it goes from being, when you open it up and you go, they didn't fix it, to, oh, they attempted, but not as much as I wanted. And it allows you to give better feedback to them. And finally, it becomes a visual checklist for the reviewer. When I open this up, I can just look at this and see, yep, they addressed all my feedback, and I don't need to open up ZBrush or Maya or Max or whatever and reevaluate the entire asset. I can just take a look and go, yeah, it looks good, and move on with my life.
All right, so Dave, if I had to sum this all up, first, you take a step back at your asset and you look at it as a whole. And then you move on with the screenshot and you gather all your screenshots in one big image that you'll be able to address your feedback on, right?
Yep.
And then you point your arrows at everything you want to change at once, just so if someone comes and grabs you for lunch, or if you get this really interesting email you wanted to read, you actually don't forget about your feedback. Third, you apply the overpaint only if necessary, right? It's not an all case situation. Fourth, you number your arrows in order of importance. And finally, you get to writing your feedback. Am I good?
Yeah, that covers it.
It would have been awkward.
Yeah.
In addition to that, you can also do the follow-up with the vendors. Especially, we recommend that especially at the beginning of the collaboration, or when the collaboration reaches, let's say, a problematic point, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. So all the issues that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we actually managed to cover them all with this new process of yours. By the way, David, do you know how much time we saved
Well,
compared to our old ways.
on an individual asset, doing individual feedback, it's a little bit hard to say. I don't know if it's much of a time savings. But in the back and forth and the reduction of repeated feedbacks and the reduction of assets going back and forth, we figure that we save about 25% of our time overall on the project.
25%. It's pretty impressive. Well, that concludes that for us. Thank you all very much for coming today. And we really hope that these points are going to help you with your future collaboration, if you can reuse some of them. I know that Colby here already used some of it in his presentation.